into business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your constitutionally protected host, Rick. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about the cupboard being bare. And although we could apply this to Biden's head, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. What I am talking about, or what I'm going to be talking about, has to deal with our supply chain issues. There's several key points that I think are really important for you, my listeners, to know and understand. Also I'll have, if I have enough time, I have a kind of an addendum follow-up to last week's talking about China and their troubles that they're having, and of course the situation dealing with Taiwan as well, China and Taiwan, that little part and corner of the world that we should be watching over. But before I get to that, of course, I also need to say that I have a couple of shows coming up. I have a Halloween special. Last year, I did a reading of the Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. I've got a pretty cool, what I would like to think of as a pretty cool effect that I've been working on for you for this Halloween. So you might want to tune in for the Halloween special. Also, if you haven't checked out last year's Thanksgiving Day special, I had a special co-host, of course, Captain Unicorn, and he has willingly agreed to come back this year for the pre-Thanksgiving Day special, where we're going to talk about food and getting food prepared, and then also we'll also be discussing things like maybe there might be some artistic flair, decorating, that sort of thing. I do understand that there is going to be a shortage on turkeys for whatever reason. And again, this kind of covers all of our supply chain shortage issues. But I also have another announcement tonight. Tonight I have I have the pleasure of presenting a new affiliation. This is sort of like the NCCA. They're not going to take the place of the NCCA, but you know, I do need to give them give them props and give them some time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to step right into that. Hopefully So the Institute on the Constitution. Now, the Institute on the Constitution was established in 2004 as a 501c3 nonprofit with one mission: to restore the constitutional republic through grassroots education. All courses and materials are developed using primary source documents, like the Declaration of Independence, for an example, and are taught from the American view of law and government, as defined by the Declaration of Independence, in the following 3 key points. 1, there is a God. 2, our rights come from him. And 3, the purpose of civil government is to secure and protect our God-given rights. The IOTC offers the opportunity to educate yourself on our most precious founding document, the Constitution of the United States. They also provide tools to educate your community and get involved with local government. Start by taking their free U.S. Constitution course and go from there. Use my affiliate link, theamericanview.com/#Whiskey Musings to sign up. And while you are there, take a moment to look through their other course materials and information. My affiliate link, once again, is theamericanview.com/#Whiskey Musings to get great content to learn about our historical founding and support the show in the process. That's theamericanview, all one word, .com/#, for those that don't know what the hashtag is, Whiskey Musings. Go check them out today. Thank you, Institute on the Constitution for allowing me to be an affiliate. All right. So, moving on to, also keep in mind as well that my social media links are right here. Feel free to go ahead and jump on those. And, I post memes, I post, interesting things, and that kind of stuff. So go ahead and I try to keep up on all three of them, at the same time, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Gab as well. I try to keep up on all of that. So moving on to last week, or not last week, but the week before last, I kicked off a new segment, that I wanted to carry on. Sorry, the cat is causing me problems here. I gotta get him down. All right. So, I wanted to continue that, and that segment has to deal with the American Patriots Almanac. Let me get that in front of the screen or in front of the camera so you guys can see. And so we're going to go ahead and kick that off. That's right. On this day in American history. All right. So let me grab my reading glasses here. Okay. On today's date, which is October 16th, we are going to discuss the birthday of Noah Webster. He was born in 1758 in West Hanford, Connecticut. He generations of school children grew up studying his popular blue-backed speller, so called because of its blue cover. But his most famous work was the American Dictionary of the English Language, first published in 1828. At a time when educated people spelled words however they wished, Webster's dictionary helped bring order and consistency to the language. An ardent patriot, he tried to free the American language from British influences. For example, he Americanized the British spelling of colour, C-O-L-O-U-R, changing it to our present day color, C-O-L-O-R. In his essay on the education of youth in America, he argued that education in the young republic should promote love of country, an idea still good in the 21st century today. So that was October 16th is Noah Webster's birthday, the founder and creator of Webster's Dictionary. So I thought I'd bring that to you. I found that kind of interesting. Now, moving on to today's topic. So, in case you haven't noticed, and there was a video that came out that Donald Trump went and was put out, where he was taking a look at all of the shelves that were empty. And I don't know if you've been to a store recently or a Quickie Mart or any of that, but we've all been hearing about supply chain issues across the U.S. and actually across the globe. Now, most of the time you would think that this has something to do with COVID. In reality, it does. It has parts to do with COVID, but it also has some other issues as well. There are some other things that are going on that certain people have been able to flesh out and that kind of stuff. I've got a few articles on that. So let me go ahead. We'll switch right over to that. So this first one, this comes from the Epoch Times, and it basically says U.S. supply chain disruptions too great for Biden Christmas fix, according to experts. This is by Jack Phillips. He put it out October 15th of 2021. Now, the funny thing about this is that, Biden just recently announced that supply chains, he wants the ports, in particular LA, to kick over and start doing 24-hour shifts rather than just doing it in 2 shifts. He wants, full three shifts, 24-hour operation. So taking a look at this Earlier this week, this is quoting from the piece, the White House released a statement saying it received confirmation from UPS, FedEx, Walmart, and other companies, as well as the Port of Los Angeles, to increase the number of shifts to deal with the backlog of container ships, labor shortages, and warehousing issues. This is a quote from our wonderful president. This is an across-the-board commitment to going to 24/7, Biden said after meeting with the CEOs of several companies, adding that, quote, we need the rest of the private sector chain to step up as well. Now, this is true. I mean, this ultimately, this is really, really true here because of the fact that, and wow, I've got an artifact here somewhere. Oh, over here. What's this? Let's see. There we go. I had to adjust something in the background. Okay, so, this is true. We have a backlog of ships. I don't know. I mean, I live near the Puget Sound, and we haven't seen a bunch of ships like this backed up in the bay. In fact, there's a photo I'm going to show you in a little bit with regards to ships being backed up in Los Angeles. I did hear at one point there was something like 60 container ships that were sitting out in the ocean just waiting to come into the dock. So let's continue with the piece here and see if maybe there's something else. So not everybody, though, is believing that going to 24-hour operation is going to work. And the MGA Entertainment CEO, Isaac Larian, said in a Fox News interview that whether the ports are open 24 hours a day or 48 hours a day, you cannot get labor. He's like, if you cannot get labor, you cannot get trucks. If you cannot get them, and if you can't get trucks, obviously, you can't get the merchandise out. He thinks that Biden's plan is too little, too late. And he says, and I quote, frankly, it's a political gimmick to me. Now, a lot of people would think that. I actually, as far as like kicking it off, I mean, I don't necessarily deal with supply chain very much, but I do understand distribution. And I do understand that sometimes what happens is if you clear up one bottleneck, you create another bottleneck further down the road. And one of the things that this basically kind of refers to is Stephen Ricciuccio. Boy, I mincemeat that. Sorry, Stephen, and really, really horrible. He's the U.S. chief economist at Mizuho Securities. He said the White House's plan likely won't solve the root causes of the problem. And he says, and I quote, what the president's doing isn't going to really hurt, but at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the problem, he told Reuters in an interview. So the question is why? Well, I mean, obviously we have, this is a piece out of the Business Insider on October 6th from Grace K. This one here is nearly 500,000 shipping containers are stuck off the coast of Southern California as the ports operate below capacity. And it's stuff like this that actually prompted the president to try and kick it off by getting more people or more operating hours. I heard an observation that some of this is actually part of the reason for, or part of the problem when it comes to things like automation, that we actually have, they were questioning the unions' involvement because the unions have been preventing automation from coming in, and automation would allow for certain functions to run on a 24/7 basis. Now, whether or not this has to deal with trucking or whatever, I'm not too sure. But one thing that I do know, and I believe one of these pieces kind of talks about, is that there is also, because of these backups at ports, there's only a finite number of shipping containers that have actually been built. There's not a whole heck of a lot of an overflow because obviously we're talking about just-in-time delivery. So regardless of the product, everybody kind of doesn't want to have to store a whole bunch of stuff because storing things costs money. So the idea here is to, make sure that as the first product is leaving, or the product that has been depleted, as the last item of that product is leaving, there should be a shipment coming in that has replacement product. And that's kind of the idea of just-in-time delivery. The challenge here, of course, has to be with the just-in-time part, because as of right now, we have a bunch of shipping containers, as you can see on this piece. Um, you know, a bunch of containers that are stuck outside of Los Angeles and in Southern California. Now, a lot of these pieces are focusing on Southern California for a reason. Los Angeles and Long Beach, California, they handle somewhere around 40% of all of the shipping that comes into the United States. And then of course other various ports like Seattle, Tacoma, over in on the East Coast, New York and some of those places, they all handle other things, but Los Angeles and Long Beach, California, those two ports handle 40%. That's an awful lot for one particular place to basically be bringing all of this stuff in. And so here is an image of all of those shipping containers, and this is off of Seal Beach, California, on Tuesday, January 26th. So this was a while ago when this picture was taken, but it gives you an idea of the situation that we're dealing with here. Cargo ships have come into the port and tried to, they just can't get offloaded, and so they have to sit out in the bay or further out into the ocean in order to keep shipping lanes open and so on and so forth, as they wait to come into the docks to get offloaded. Now, there's a couple of options here, or a couple of reasons for this, and let me shrink this down a little bit. So from this piece from the Business Insider, it says, quote, on Tuesday, Los Angeles had nearly 500,000 20-foot shipping containers, or about 12 million metric tons of goods, waiting in drift areas and anchor spots to open up, 4 spots to open up along the port to dock and unload, according to data pulled from the Marine Exchange of Southern California's master queuing list. The port has 19 mega container ships waiting to dock, the largest of which is carrying 16,022 20-foot shipping containers. That is a huge amount of ships. 19 mega container ships. So you would take 19 times the 16,000 in order to get an idea. Now, part of the problem that Kip Ludet, the executive director of the Marine Exchange for Southern California, told the Business Insider earlier this year that part of the problem, and I quote, is the ships are double or triple the size of ships we were seeing 10 or 15 years ago. They take longer to unload. You need more trucks, more trains, more warehouses to put the cargo. Now, at the time of this writing, the port had 90 container ships in the port, 63 of which were waiting offshore on Tuesday. Remember, I said 60. The number is far above the port's pre-pandemic average of 0 to 1 ships at anchor. So basically what they're saying is they're not able to turn the ships over fast enough. And some of them are floating further than 20 miles offshore in order to keep shipping lanes clear. Now, this obviously is a problem, shipping lanes and so on and so forth. But further down in the piece, we get an idea why. So despite the backlog, ports are operating at lower capacities. So the ports are only operating at like 60 to 70% capacity. And this is from Ulf Ostergaard, president of the North American region for German ship operator Hapag-Lloyd, told the Wall Street Journal. So operationally, they are, they're not operating on the 24/7 schedule here. And so it's a huge operational disadvantage. And pointing out that the fact that the two ports, again, Los Angeles and Long Beach, are closed for several hours on most days as well as Sundays. Now, the hours of operation are typically 2 shifts. You would have like an 8 to 3 or maybe a 7 to 3 shift, and then you would have a 3 to midnight or something like that. So you would have 2 shifts that would work. But then the third shift, of course, you wouldn't have. And then, of course, like he says, you would shut down on Sunday. So that does make an impact. That does make it harder to offload some of those ships, especially when you're dealing with the mega ships that are sitting out there as well. So a little further down in the piece, they're also talking about, the longer hours. So this is Gene Shiroka, the executive director of Port Los Angeles, said that the longer hours, meaning going to longer 24/7 hours, will do little to address the backlog where truckers and warehouse operators have not similarly extended their hours. This is kind of where I was talking about how you clean up one bottleneck and another bottleneck occurs. So it's not optimal for truckers to actually pick up their loads at night because of the fact that when they go out and they drive out to the warehouse to drop their goods off or to back up and get unloaded, the warehouses aren't open either. So many, and he here in the piece is talking about many of the warehouses near the West Coast don't have the space for the goods because about 98% of the warehouses in Southern California's logistics heavy Inland Empire region are fully occupied, while the entire U.S., Western U.S., has a 3.6% vacancy rate, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, keep in mind, 3.6 vacancy rate, that's not a lot of room, meaning that the warehouses are full, everything's full. So why are we having a problem even with like the warehouses and everything else where we haven't had an issue before? Trucking and warehousing and so on and so forth. Well, there's a couple of things that we talk about with that, but it's not just here in the U.S. Here in a piece by Bloomberg, we have the world's economy's supply chain problem keeps getting worse. And it's not just here in the U.S. that's the problem. It's everywhere. Although because of our issues, we're sort of exacerbating the issue further down the road. And what they're talking about here is, this is in the piece, that the supply chain crunch that was meant to be a temporary situation, again, kind of inferring due to COVID-19, now looks like it will last well into next year as the Delta variant upends factory production in Asia and disrupts shipping, posing more shocks to the world economy. Manufacturers are reeling from shortages of key components. Again, keeping in mind, this is that just-in-time delivery idea that everybody's been pushing. And higher raw material and energy costs are being forced into bidding wars to get space on vessels, pushing freight rates higher to record levels, and prompting some exporters to raise prices or simply cancel shipments. So, this is kind of a cascading effect. It's not just here in the US, it's cascading everywhere. Now, one thing that they also talk about has to deal, and I'll get to this here in a moment, has to deal with the materials and the equipment needed in order to do this. But China's determination to stamp out COVID, this is in the piece, has meant that even a small number of cases can cause major disruptions to trade. As an example, the government temporarily closed part of the world's third busiest container port at Ningbo for 2 weeks after a single dock worker was found to have the Delta variant. And earlier this year, wharves in Shenzhen were idled after the discovery of a handful of coronavirus cases. So in part of this, China is actually focused on a big focus on this, because if you think about it, a lot of not only U.S. Materials and products and services come from China, but a lot of the world products and services come from China as well. And so, every time they have to shut down manufacturing, just because of the fact that they're trying to stamp out COVID and get rid of it, because their policy is zero COVID still. And so they're having challenges just getting the manufacturing to actually kick up for everything. And so here, this is a piece that kind of supports the theory that this is going to continue on. This coming from the Epoch Times, and this is by Drew Van Voorhees. He published this on October 14th and updated it on the 15th. supply chain backlog to last until summer of next year, despite 24/7 operating hours. And that's based on officials. So let's see what some of the officials are. Noel Hagsagaba, Hacegaba. Don't know how to pronounce it. He's a deputy executive director for the Port of Long Beach, said that expanding the port's operating hours will not impact the supply chain disruptions, given the continued shortage of truck drivers, chassis equipment, and warehouse operations in space. So here's kind of what he's getting at with this. What he is basically talking about here is that those containers, again, for every container that gets unloaded here, it gets loaded with other product and then shipped back across the ocean. And that goes in a chain. So when the chain gets disrupted, meaning that the containers can't get offloaded here, there isn't a container to fill up with product to ship back, going back the other way. And so a backup here or a backup in China, with those containers, you don't have as enough containers to go around to be able to do this. I mean, again, we are talking about just-in-time operations. We're talking about, doing these things in such a way that all you're doing is you're basically just transferring the containers that you have, going back and forth. Now, there is a small supply of replacement containers, I'm sure, as containers get broken down, rusted out, damaged, etc. You can pull those out of service, but the supply, or the supply, is not as big as what it would be if you were expecting this kind of a scenario, because of the fact that that you're dealing with backups, and each backup creates a different problem farther down the chain. So going back to the piece, Hagsagaba, however you pronounce it, says, quote, we think it'll be summer of 2022 before we clear all 60 ships. He told the Epoch Times on October 14th. Of course, he goes on, if we take some measures now and everyone in the supply chain starts expanding their hours of operation, we're going to get there sooner. Again, he's kind of referring to the fact that, we not only have to expand at the port, but we also have to expand in warehouse hours. We have to expand trucking hours. We have to expand all of these different things moving forward. So Sal Mercogliano, a professor of maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy out of New York, said that he thinks the Biden administration, this is a quote, looked at the low-hanging fruit and finally took action. He says, the move is better late than never, but it should have been addressed sooner than this. He also says that addressing one end of the supply chain does not solve the problem. Everything must be done simultaneously, including not only addressing the current shortage of truck drivers, but increasing operations at receiving retailers as well. Now, they keep talking about truck drivers and having a shortage of truck drivers. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I'm going to bring that up here in just a second. But to continue on with the piece, the two ports, which are responsible for about 40%, again, of all imports into the United States, are on track to get more than 20 million container units this year, he says, which is significantly more than the 17.5 million units that they received in 2020. So apparently now we have more containers coming in too. And that's what these people are talking about. So before I get to this next piece, I've kind of just popped it up here, but before I get to this next piece, I kind of want to talk about the whole idea of the shortage of truck drivers. Now, one thing that hasn't been mentioned and hasn't really been talked about, but I did find out, is that California put in a lot of restrictions. They do these things for the idea of climate control, climate change, so on and so forth. And what they have done in one particular instance, and this is a possibility for some of the shortage of truck drivers in California, is that they have engaged or enacted regulation that has limited the type of truck and the trucks, that the age of the trucks that are allowed to come into California and transport goods. I believe I heard that you had to have a truck that was 2011 or newer in order to be able to deliver goods within California. Now, while it's an admirable goal, one thing that these people don't understand, or they neglected to think about, is the fact that diesel vehicles can last a very long time. Many of these trucks that are still on the road today have, million miles on them. They have, they have long years of service, long road, long haul trucking. Driving on the freeway versus stop and go in city traffic is totally different. A diesel engine is totally different than a gasoline engine. And so a lot of these trucks are going to be a lot older than your standard typical gasoline vehicle might be. That and still will be serviceable, by the way. That being the case, they also passed a law that limited the amount of trucks and hours within the, going to the ports and stuff, because they have, it is a significant amount of traffic that's coming through. I mean, 40% of the United States shipping comes through those two ports. And so in an effort to clean up some smog down there, and believe me, I've been down there when the smog was actually pretty bad. In an effort to clean that up, they have enacted regulation that basically keeps these trucks from being too old and, at least on their thought process, polluting the air a lot worse than what it actually is today. So, this, even though they talk about a shortage of trucking, I'm not entirely sure that it's a shortage of trucks, or meaning truckers, labor to actually do the job. Although there is some interest, or there is some evidence that kind of shows that there is potential solutions coming into play. Like, I did see an article, I don't have it here, but I did see an article talking about people that are coming directly out of high school, 18-year-olds, learning and driving trucks. Now, whether or not you agree with that or not, I don't know. But the point is that they are trying to figure out a way to resolve this quote unquote trucking shortage. But it's not just the trucks that are the shortage. You also have a shortage of trailers, because not every truck has a trailer. In fact, most truckers don't even have their own trailers. They're actually hauling trailers around. And many times what I've heard is that many times these containers, first of all, the containers are a problem, but you also have the trolleys, or the truck undercarriages that carry these containers. There's a shortage of those as well. Well, all with the idea that the manufacturer of those items hasn't caught up with the particular situation. But another thing that I found interesting was an opinion piece that was in the Epoch Times also, that kind of talked about, what kinds of things can we do to alleviate some of this. And this is from John Seiler, or Seiler, however you pronounce his last name. He posted this, or wrote this on October 15th, and it was updated on October 16th. And the title here says, "The Reagan Cure for Clogged Ports and Goods Shortages." And this is kind of interesting. I personally, I loved Reagan. Yes, I was born, but just without dating myself, I don't remember a lot of the Reagan years. I was in elementary school for much of his presidency, or I was in primary school for much of his presidency. And the reality basically is that he did a few things, because there's a commonality between what's happening today in terms of inflation and supply chain shortages and, stagnation of jobs, that is very reminiscent for anyone who was during that time period of, Jimmy Carter's presidency and the ending of the 70s. Now, one of the things that this piece brings up is the fuel service shortages that occurred. And this is an image, as a public image, of the lines, the long lines to get gas. There was gas rationing. There was, and a lot of this had to deal with the supply problem, not so much in terms of the shipping aspect, like what we're dealing with today, but in terms of the supply problem, because the Ayatollah Khomeini overtook Iran, and Iran being one large producer of oil over in OPEC nations at the time, he because of that uprising and him taking over, a lot of the supply was disrupted. Supply of oil and gas was disrupted because of that. And so you ended up with things like this, with automobiles lining up for fuel. Now, I barely remember some of this, having to line up for fuel or having to have it rationed. This particular picture was in June of 1979. So I do have some recollection of these kinds of things occurring and having to sit in line in order to get gas. But the opinion writer for the piece, he basically kind of proposes a couple different options that Reagan actually did, that could apply in terms of today's issues. One of the things that he talks about is cutting regulations. And remember, I was just talking about the California regulations dealing with the trucks and the number of trucks and some of their I'm going to call them the California EPA regulations, and that for how often they can drive and that kind of stuff. And here, the author here says, one of the first things that Reagan did when in office was cut regulations on the energy industry. Specifically, although President Carter had introduced some decontrol of oil, in 1981, Reagan ended all production limits and price controls on oil. Critics predicted soaring prices for oil and gas at the pump, but the opposite actually happened. Production soared and prices dropped. And then he goes on to say that except for winning the Cold War against the Soviet Union, Reagan is best remembered for cutting taxes and reviving the economy from stagflation, which is stagnation plus inflation. Now, this is important because we're actually in this kind of in this situation right now. I mean, wages have been going up right around 4.5, maybe a little bit more, 4.6%, but inflation has overtaken those wages, and inflation is running right around 5.1, 5.2%. So in actuality, even though you did get a pay increase, your wages increased, you're actually losing money because inflation overtook all of what you've earned as additional, plus a little bit more away from the value of your dollar because of inflation. And it's stuff like this that we're talking about in terms of stagnation in the economy and then inflation. Now, you could talk about all day long about where the inflation is coming from. Some of it is supply chain issues. Some of it is due to coming out of COVID. But a lot of it, honestly, is due to the idea of, Biden just kind of pumping the economy with money from the government. That actually increases inflation because it makes your dollar worth less, which is what inflation does. Now, going back to the piece, the top income tax rate dropped from 70% under Carter to 50% by 1983, then to 28% in 1986. Equivalent rates for the middle class were cut. Everybody paid less, not just the rich, but everybody paid less. Now, this is kind of reminiscent of the Trump tax cuts, which if you actually dig into the Trump tax cuts, everybody got a cut. It wasn't just, the mainstream media talks about how, it was only the rich that got cuts. It's actually the most prominent cut was done on the middle class. I think it was something like 30 to 35% cut in the middle class. Yes, the top 1% did get a cut. They got, I think, something around 30% cut. And the lower class did get a cut also of like 31% or something like that. But the middle class actually got a bigger cut through the Trump tax cuts. Now, the economy, back to the piece, the economy soared by 7% in 1983 and an average of 4% after that. And the author then puts in an opinion, until President Bush foolishly raised taxes in 1990. So one thing that if you study economics in any way, shape, or form, especially with the capitalist system that we do have, two major things um, can make a difference in the economy in terms of how things run. One of them is cutting regulations, taking off regulations out of and getting government out of the way of private businesses. This is a potential first step, which we know that the Dems are not going to do. They've already been talking about their $3.5 trillion plan to build back better. They've already talked about taxing the rich. They talk about taxing more and more and more, increasing taxes on things like, as a part of that $3.5 trillion package, marriage and capital gains and places where, normally, yes, the rich would normally play, but when everybody has more money, they can start to invest and put more money into things like, investing back into their businesses and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, some of the problem that you have with this in terms of cutting taxes, businesses are starting to feel like they need to hang on to their money. And whenever that happens, the economy actually slows down. We've seen this in the past. We've seen it in many, many cases. So dealing with some of that, the other piece, the other part of this has to deal with, regulations and taxes. You've got to cut both. You've got to do both in order to stimulate the economy. And unfortunately, these people, the current administration is definitely not going to do that. They're not interested in that. They think that, and they believe that the way to eliminate some of the issues that we're having is to just throw more money into government and have the government take over stuff. The reality of it is that no, the government doesn't make anything better. In fact, if anything, government usually causes our problems more and is not the solution to the same problem that it caused. Now, this next piece that I'm going to show you, this actually gets into a little bit of, so last week I was talking to you, and let me actually pull out here. So last week I talked and discussed a little bit about China, and we have to keep an eye on the China and Taiwan scenario, not just because of the fact that it is huge just to us, but it's also huge to the world as well. One thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is that a lot of our electronics have some piece of Taiwan technology within them, even if you get them from China or Japan. China and Japan are consumers of Taiwanese integrated circuits and chipsets and that kind of stuff. So it's an integral part of our world today, in our electronic world. And so to have China sit here and threaten Taiwan, that's going to cause some serious issues if they decide to invade. And one of the things that I was talking about last week was how China is actually running low on money. They have a housing crisis currently going on. They have a large real estate firm that is potentially going into bankruptcy. They have an aging population that the Chinese government is going to have to support, and they're going to retire. They don't have enough youngsters in the workforce to backfill to be able to pay for that, because again, just like Social Security over here, the idea is that it's the people coming up from into the workforce that are paying for the people who have retired. And this is one of the problems that we've had in terms of Social Security, where the aging population went into retirement, and then of course now, because of medical advancements, they're living longer, and things like the government taking away money from Social Security and so on and so forth, rather than keeping it as a bank account for those people, they actually put it into the general fund and then dipped into it and took the money away. I mean, that could be a whole other program all on its own. But the idea, though, is that the upcoming workforce should be able to be producing the money in order to go into the accounts to take care of the people who are pulling and drawing from those accounts. And unfortunately, it's not happening because the population shift between here in America with the baby boomers, but also over in China, where they had that one child policy for so long, that they just recently lifted, that they're running into the same kinds of issues that we have been with the idea of Social Security. So that being said, an understanding of the chipset problem that we have right now, we have a backlog of desire for integrated circuits and electronics and chipsets. So here's an interesting piece that came out in the Epoch Times also talking about this. And China could seize Taiwan to fulfill semiconductor needs, U.S. researchers warn. Now, this is an interesting little angle that I've been thinking about, but I'm glad to see that some other people are actually thinking about it as well. So in the piece here, it talks about currently there is no more important base of integrated circuit capacity and production than Taiwan, stated a U.S.-based research company IC Insights in a statement. So China, quoting from the piece, has a huge problem with its inability to produce leading-edge IC devices for its future electronic system needs, a problem that it believes it can be solved through unification with Taiwan by whatever means necessary. So basically, China believes that they are going to be able to pick up, just like any other business acquisition would happen. If you can't produce it yourself, what do? You go out and you buy it. And that's essentially what is going on here. Although they're not buying Taiwan, they're possibly going to invade. Now, moving from the piece, earlier this month, Chinese leader Xi Jinping vowed to achieve reunification with the democratic island for the sake of, quote, preserving its sovereignty, end quote. Now, China's never ruled the country. Researchers said that Beijing has yearned for the island's capacity to make the world's top-level computer chips. So, again, Taiwan has a lot of electronics. There's a lot of electronic products that are out there that have some type of Taiwan technology within them, regardless of whether they're coming from China or Korea or Japan or any of those other locations. They have some element of Taiwan in them. And if this happens and there's a disruption here, we're already at a shortage of semiconductor chips. And if China actually goes and takes over Taiwan, this could be a major problem for electronics moving forward. So here, combined, China and Taiwan, this is from the piece, would hold about 37% of global IC, integrated circuit capacity, almost 3 times that of North America, according to the IC, the company that did this research. So here's the key: be it washing machines, electronic devices, or fighter jets, millions of products nowadays depend on computer microchips, also known as semiconductors, to power the electronics. Smaller chips come with better performance, yet require more advanced technologies and equipment to make. Okay. So this is part of what you're seeing in terms of the backlog for things like cars. I mean, and I think I've got this in here as well. So going back to the piece, while the Taiwanese economy would crater if China attempted a military takeover of the island nation, China's economy would also suffer greatly, IC Insights said. Quote, the question is whether China is willing to accept relatively short-term economic pain for the long-term benefit of having the largest amount of the world's leading-edge IC production capacity under its control for many years to come. So one thing that you need to understand is that even though China can make it, Taiwan is actually making better quality, higher, more advanced chips. Now, what's interesting here, though, that I found in this piece is that the Taiwan conglomerate, the TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, and I can't remember the rest of it, but TSMC, they said that they announced in 2020 that they're going to build a $12 billion factory here in Arizona to help the United States reduce dependence on foreign-based supply chains of key technologies. And they said that back in June, that the construction has started. Now, the thing that's interesting about this, and this is something that I've been talking about for quite some time, is the fact that America offshored a lot of our products. We offshored a lot of our stuff to other places in order to gain, the advantages that we did get with the money, and the money that we were saving. But the funny thing about it is that we gave away all of that manufacturing of those products to overseas, and we lost jobs here in the US. Now, one thing that Trump was trying to do was it was trying to bring back some of those jobs. We have to focus here on the US. We have to focus our manufacturing here. We cannot just continue to be heavy set on service related industries. We do need to move forward with manufacturing here in the US. We have to bring back manufacturing here, because a country that does not manufacture things here will have difficulty staying afloat. If all we do is service related stuff, we're going to end up in a tailspin. We're going to end up we are so dependent upon technology. And this is a wake up call. This supply chain problem is a wake up call. If China invades Taiwan and takes over those semiconductor chips, chip manufacturing, and the integrated circuit chip manufacturing, we are going to be in a world of hurt. This is why we need to watch. We need to see what Taiwan is going to do. And to be honest with you, based on Biden's debacle in Afghanistan and his posturing against places like Iran during the Obama years, and some of these other places, he is, Hunter Biden, there's evidence and indications that Hunter Biden is taking money from the Chinese for Joe Biden. So I personally am not holding out a lot of hope here, moving forward, that China is going to not invade Taiwan because of U.S. involvement. Now, what'll be interesting to watch is whether or not Japan or, Vietnam or South Korea or Indonesia, some of the other countries, Australia, some of the other countries in that area, whether or not they do something. But the U.S., I'm not entirely sold that this administration will probably send a bunch of, strong words for them. But I don't think that this country and this administration is going to be willing to engage with the Chinese just to protect Taiwan. Now, that being said, there have been reports of American soldiers over in Taiwan doing joint exercises and helping the Taiwanese train, the Taiwanese army train for military action. That is still going to remains to be seen in the long run. But the thing about it is that, again, if China decides to invade Taiwan and takes it over, regardless of our interaction with them, if we lose that as a capability, if we lose that as a partner in our movement forward, we're going to have some big challenges for electronic devices in the near future. And that's my final Whiskey Musings thought. Oh my gosh, that was a huge show. Thank you very much for watching the broadcast and coming all the way down. Do me a favor, support the Institute on the Constitution. Go and check them out. Try their free online course. It's 12 episodes, and they give you a whole bunch of information and some video links in order to watch and learn about the Constitution and our founding, and what the Constitution means. Do me a favor too, if you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and subscribe. If you're here on YouTube, I don't know if I'm going to get brought around in the whole idea of getting censored. So do me a favor, check out rumble.com. I do live stream over on Rumble. And also, if you haven't done so yet, check out my store.whiskeymusings.online. That's store.whiskeymusings, all one word, .online. Check it out. Grab yourself some gear. Get yourself a good hoodie. It's coming around to be fall and winter. You're probably going to need some warm clothes. So grab yourself a hoodie with a logo on it, or maybe plan ahead and get some t-shirts or something with my phrasing on it of when I drink, I think. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you next time on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Good night, everybody.